All right, so we're going to transition right into this next panel, which is a view from the boardroom, where we have three top leaders in the technology industry in the United States and the top leader in the U.S. government, Aneesh Chopra. So I'm going to introduce everybody. I think the two CEOs who are not here yet will be joining us shortly. So
in fact, right now.
There we go.
We're on our way.
Just in time timing.
Yes.
We're on our way.
All right,
Thank
great.
you.
So I'm gonna start with Bill. Bill Nutty is the Chief Executive Officer of NCR. For those of you who are old enough, it used to be National Cash Register, which I don't know how many years ago that was, but
126.
126 years ago, Dayton, Ohio. NCR is a global technology company with 22,400 employees and 2008 revenue of $5.3 billion. Bill has a long and distinguished career in the technology industry. Before joining NCR as CEO, he was the president and CEO of Symbol Technology, which if you used to go to the grocery store, you'd find that the scanner on the little laser scanner, almost all were Symbol Technologies. Before that, he had 10 years experience at Cisco, including senior vice president for the company's worldwide service provider operations, and also a president of Europe, Middle East, and Asia operations. In 2008, Time Magazine's cover story on 10 ideas that are changing the world highlighted the global self-service movement and identified Bill as a global thought leader behind that movement. So we're really pleased that Bill can join us. To Bill's left is Dan Reed. Dan is the Corporate Vice President of Technology Policy and Strategy at Microsoft, and he's also the leader of the Extreme Computing Group there. So Dan wears two hats. One is a policy hat, one is an R&D manager hat. In that capacity, he reports and works closely with Craig Mundy, who's Microsoft's Chief Research and Strategy Officer. And he's also responsible for R&D on the cutting edge of parallel and ultra-fast computing efforts at Microsoft, as well as Microsoft's cloud computing research as well. Before coming to Microsoft, he had a number of other positions, including the Gutzgell Professor, Head of Computer Science, and Director of the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at U of I. He was also Chancellor's Eminent Professor at UNC Chapel Hill, where I used to be, and was Founding Director of UNC's Renaissance Computing Institute. He's also served on the President's Council of Science Advisors. Two doors down here, Mark Mcloughlin. Mark is the Chief Executive Officer of VeriSign. He served that position since August 2009. Previously was President and Chief Operating Officer and held a number of key positions at VeriSign from 2000 to 2007, including running the company's naming services business. He also was Vice President for GemPlus, which was a world's leading smart card company, so again has a long background in the technology industry. And finally, Aneesh Chopra. Aneesh needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one. He is the first Chief Technology Officer of the U.S. government. We've never had one before, and that was one of President Obama's campaign commitments to create that position, and he wisely named Aneesh to be that person to lead that. Aneesh is also in that position Associate Director of Technology within the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Prior to coming to the Obama administration, he was the Secretary of Technology for the Commonwealth of Virginia, or as I used to call it, the state of Virginia. From January 2006 to April 2009. Before that, was Managing Director of the Advisory Board Advisory Board Company, where he focused a lot on healthcare issues. He was also named to Government Technology Magazine's 25 Top Doers, Dreamers, and Drivers, as I was once, but I was not a doer or a driver. I was a dreamer. Aneesh, I think, was a doer, dreamer, and driver, and continues in that role right now. So what I think we'll do is maybe everybody just kind of stays at the table. I think it's probably easier. We'll go down the line. We'll start with Mark, and maybe 5 to 7 minute comments on what your reactions to this strategy. And then I'm going to have Aneesh give his reactions and comments as a respondent, and then we'll have a dialogue and discussion after that. So, Mark?
Sure. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. It's good to see everybody today. So from the strategy standpoint, I was trying to think of good analogies in the past to sort of put this in context. And And one that I thought might be appropriate, it's not the same level of things, was but back in the 60s of the idea of a moonshot. And I think in that case, government controllers really set an audacious goal for folks. And when they set that goal, it really spurred everybody's imagination. And then very quickly, public-private partnerships evolved in order to achieve that goal. And it got everybody very excited. And of course, we achieved the goal at the end of the day, but the real value of that, I think, was the journey from the statement of the goal to when you actually got there, because but all the wonderful things that came out of that. So I think the idea of cloud computing example will seriously drive innovation in the country, but not so much because there's a destination called get to the cloud. It's who knows, we're halfway there today for all we know, right? But mostly because of all the challenges that will arise in the process of trying to understand that. And when you have that sort of mission statement out there that gets everybody excited, you have the government committing to put money where their mouth is of moving $20 billion of the $80 billion spend into the cloud, you get everybody's attention. And when you have everybody's attention, they'll come to the table, there'll be discussions, and then you'll start to see innovation, and then innovation is going to lead to productivity, and the productivity is going to lead to great results. And as we kind of look back again on the analogy of the moonshot, all sorts of interesting things came out of that other than we went to the moon, like dialysis, stuff that's used in running shoes today, prepackaged food. All these wonderful things came out of the research that was required in order to achieve the ultimate goal. And I have a feeling that as we go through the move through to technology innovation, move to the cloud with the government's leadership in this case, that we're going to see all sorts of things like that as well, from resiliency, from flexibility, from security, data management. All sorts of things are going to have to be discussed and figured out. I have the privilege of chairing the NSTAC's cloud computing subgroup, and we're just starting to talk about these things now. And one of the conversations there is it's inevitable. It's not about whether we want to do it or not. It's already happening. It's really a question about how you think about it at that point, and what are the challenges that will be raised, and then how do we come together and overcome those challenges. So I think I applaud the government's audacious goal here. As far as the program itself, I think the underlying pieces of research, education, the physical infrastructure, the advanced technology system, I think those are all the right calls at the end of the day. But the government can't do it itself, and I think has wisely reached out to the private sector, who I think are going to rise to the challenge here, and we'll figure this out together. So, from my 2 cents, I think it's fantastic. I think it's the right thing to do, and I think the approach so far has been very collaborative in nature, and we'll see. If we were sitting here 5-7 years from today, I think we'd list a whole bunch of things that resulted from this that may or may not have anything to do with cloud computing, but there'll be real innovation and productivity gains for the country, which will be important for us as to maintain our status in the world.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. Bill.
I mean, ultimately, I think this is about U.S. competitiveness at a macro level for us to consider. And there are a lot of different issues that feed into this point on U.S. competitiveness. We can dive deeply into issues such as education, as an example, being a part of this process. But there are many, many big issues, I think, to tackle, and to tackle quickly. Today is the anniversary. 2 years ago today, the markets hit their low point. And we've been up and to the right for 2 years. And to me, it seems as though we're still struggling with some very significant issues in our own country that are certainly wrapped around innovation per se. I'll talk about a few today. Our company is uniquely positioned, I think, to talk about this issue because we are a company that's been innovating for 126 years. And we've been able to stay alive for 126 years. And you have to be a great innovator to be able to withstand the test of time. And we don't look at innovation purely from the point of view of technology, although that's our soul, if you will, the nucleus of NCR. We look at innovation spanning process innovation, organizational innovation, and so on, business model innovation. So we take innovation to the nth degree in order to accomplish our goals, and I think as a country, we need to think about it from that perspective as well. I'm sure many of you in the audience use our technology. I would guarantee you have in the last couple of days. We as a company perform on average about 250 million transactions a day with consumers. So we get to see consumers in a very unique way around the world. It's 250 million touch points a day. I want to dive into the issue on patents for a moment and make a comment. My general counsel, who's in the back, reminded me of something as we were listening to Austin talk, and that is that, you know, in my world, in our world of technology, 3 years for patent application is the difference between being relevant and meeting the competitive market window and being irrelevant. Many of you purchased the first iPad just 6 months ago and found out a week ago that you have a largely obsolete product. If in fact we're waiting 3 years for...
I still love it.
I love it as well, but 3 years is a bit long in technology to make a difference. It's a cycle that literally can only last that long. For us, though, there is a macro issue as well that's more business related that I want to bring to your attention, and I think you need to bring to the attention of Congress and make more broadly well known, and that is the issue of taxes. You know, we can talk about patents, we can talk about technology innovation, we can talk about education, but our tax system is flawed in the United States for business. We have the highest tax rates of any country in the world for corporate taxes today. Now that will be true especially when Japan rolls back the 5% corporate tax that they're about to roll back. We are also under a global tax system versus that of a territorial tax system, meaning we tax income generated on foreign soil, where most countries don't. So the competitive issue for us is incredibly important. My competition, and I have competitors in Japan, I have competitors in Europe, are living in a world of territorial tax systems where the income they make outside of their home country is not taxed, but mine is. I would also tell you that I can't bring back income I make from foreign sources in other countries into the United States to invest in the United States because of the tax system. It would cost me too much to take several $100 million I have sitting in Germany, as an example, back into the U.S. because I have to pay taxes on that when I return that money to the U.S., which is ironic because I want to invest it here in the U.S. I want to create jobs. I want to invest in innovation, and for us, that's to me a very significant issue as it relates to the whole issue of competitiveness. Again, not being a technology issue per se, but a very important issue for us to tackle. I do think jobs are at risk if we don't satisfy this requirement for U.S. companies to become more competitive vis-a-vis tax rates. I can assure you that this is not also an issue of U.S. jobs. For every job that I outsource overseas, I'm probably creating 1 to 2 new jobs in the U.S., and I have to be successful outside the U.S. in order to be successful inside the U.S. Because, of course, the ever-increasing global landscape of opportunity, particularly in emerging markets, offers our company growth outside of what we would call more mature countries, U.S., Western Europe, et cetera, that are lower generally in terms of growth, if you will. And for us, you know, our technology is technology that improves productivity. There are 2 factors, as we well know, to GDP growth: population growth and productivity growth. Our technology allows for, you know, our customers to generate higher productivity, and in many cases, higher revenues as a result of you being able to change the consumer experience. We're doing that in the U.S., and we do it for our customers every day here. be it financial services or retail, and we do it outside the U.S. But growth on a GDP basis outside the U.S. is significantly higher in emerging markets, and we have to have a way to be able to return some of that foreign income to the U.S. to invest here to be successful in our country to create jobs. So I do think that's one fundamental issue, not on the agenda per se as it relates to U.S. competitiveness, that I wanted to bring to your attention, as well as make a few other comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I know Aneesh is taking notes, and we'll have a good Aneesh is sending an email right now.
Yes.
So, Dan.
All right, thanks, Bob. Let me first state something I think is important, which is Microsoft as a company applauds the administration's commitment to innovation. I think that this is a critical time for the U.S. as we think about rapidly increasing global competition and the things that accrue from that. And I want to pick up on a couple things that both of the previous speakers mentioned. I think one of the challenges that we face collectively is that the rate of change is accelerating. As Bill noted, 3 years is a long time for a patent. 3 years is a long time for a business. 3 years is a long time for technology. In fact, 3 years is sometimes a long time for a skill base. And so how we think about the rate of change and how it's challenging all of our structures, business, government, nonprofits, and the individuals involved in those, and the effect of disruptive change is really an important issue. And I think we need collectively to think about nimble mechanisms to accommodate the inevitability of rapid change. And that's going to bring some new issues. Historically, the U.S., I would argue, has been a crisis-driven country in many of the ways that we responded to things. And we're certainly in the midst, I would suggest, of another crisis now as we think about how we innovate in this space. As Austin noted, and I was glad the issue of IT jobs was raised, I can tell you that Microsoft and the other folks in the IT space, and I suspect my colleagues will say this as well, there's an intense global competition for skilled talent. And there is a shortfall of talent, certainly in technical domains, particularly in computing in the U.S. It's been an issue for a long time. It's certainly an issue in the diversity of the pipeline. There's some profound issues there about inclusion that we have to continue to address. One of the things that's been a hallmark, though, of the U.S. is since the Second World War, and argue for all of our history, we have been a net importer of intellectual talent. We have been a beacon that's attracted the best and brightest on the planet because of the opportunities that existed in the U.S. As the rest of the world catches up, those people see increasing opportunities at home. And so how we continue to create differential opportunities to attract and retain that talent, not only the talent that's born on U.S. soil, but the talent that we want to attract and retain from around the world, is a big issue. The issue about timescales and investment in basic research, not only in universities and government, but in the private sector. Many of the tax incentives challenge long-term investment in basic research in the private sector. If you look at the demise of many of the basic research labs that we've seen in industry over the last 2 decades, there are challenges there. Microsoft continues to invest in that space, but it's increasingly more challenging for all of us in industry to do that. So I want to sort of leave you with 3 things to think about before we turn to questions. One about basic research, one about STEM education, and I would be remiss if I didn't plug my friend Aneesh's issues about broadband and communication. So I want to get a couple licks in on that before I finish. So let me start with basic research. You know, I think there were lots and lots of studies, National Academy and other studies, that show that the timeline from when a basic research idea in computing and information technology, from the appearance of that idea to when it turned into a billion-dollar industry, is typically a decade or more. And so the long-term commitment to basic research is really important. Research is what you do when you don't know what you're doing. It's how you find out new things, and the payoffs for that come in unexpected ways. As Bob mentioned, I was at the University of Illinois for many years. I was there when the Mosaic web browser appeared. I can tell you that the basic research investment that the National Science Foundation made was not to build a web browser. It was to do other technologies, and we got that as a side effect of other kinds of things. That's the kind of collateral benefit that accrues from investing in talented people and giving them the freedom to ask and try to answer difficult questions. I do worry, though, as we think about our private and public universities, about the economic challenges that they face. And so the comments about regional innovation are really important, because there's a role for the federal government, but if you look at the challenges that state-supported institutions are facing with state budget crunches, those are profound. And the hits that endowments have taken for public and private institutions affect their ability to drive regional innovation clusters as well. And we need to think hard about the federal government, state government, private sector, nonprofit partnerships to make those things strong for the long term, because we can do damage in a year or two that will take decades to recover. In the same way that you drop a rock on your foot, you break it, you could do that quickly, but it hurts for a long, long time. And we have some challenges there to keep in mind. Certainly on the education front, I think one of the challenges we face, given the rapidity of technical change, is how we think about just-in-time skills refresh. Because our historical model of education has been that you emerge in your 20s with lifelong skills. In point of fact, in today's world, what you emerge with is the ability to teach yourself repeatedly for a lifetime, and how we provide the information to go with that ability to learn as people face their 5th, their 6th, their 8th, their 10th job is a profound one. And we need to think about some issues about that. Finally, on the issue of communication, whether it be thinking about rich clients or the rise of cloud computing, the availability of wired and wireless broadband in the U.S. is a critical enabler of innovation, because it allows people to work increasingly in distributed groups, not only across the U.S. but worldwide. How we think about innovation in that space and the incentives to make things happen so that the U.S. can be globally competitive is a critical issue. So we face challenges, but also excited about the opportunities that I see ahead of us.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dan.
A smorgasbord of that which I may respond to.
You can pick any or
All.
All.
Do you mind if I roll?
All and more.
Yeah, no. So I struggle with how I would present my remarks today. One would have been a policy rebuttal, which I'm happy to do, but I'm also keen on facts on the ground. One of the benefits of being a chief technology officer is that the world we live in delivers results in 90 days. There are 10-year cycles to be sure, but there are progress that one can make along the way. So maybe I'm going to take each of the comments and attempt to describe. Let me stipulate first, we share, I don't think there was a single point of opposition, even tax, which I'll describe. There's no opposition. So the question now is the what? Let me get a little bit to the what, and I'll kind of go down the line. One of the challenges, by the way, is that not often policy gets communicated in a way that reflects. So Mark put the charge, what's the audacious goal? The president yesterday issued an audacious goal for education. He basically said, and I'll paraphrase because I'm not nearly as cool as he is on language, he basically said we need innovation in learning technologies, a quantum leap in learning technologies, so that we would have for every child a personalized tutor that is as effective as the best teacher in America and as engaging as the best video game our children play. And that's an interesting and audacious challenge. By the way, the implications of this speak to lifetime learning. We announced an ARPA Ed initiative, which Austin spoke briefly about, but we put $90 million in the proposed 12 budget to allow our educational sector to have the base of R&D that does not exist today. Now, I'm going to just slightly connect some dots. Bill was excellent in his description about economic growth, population growth plus productivity. I was at McKinsey's release of this report, the productivity gap in the United States for U.S. competitiveness, and there's a chart. If I had a graphic, I'd show you. If you look at the sectors of the American economy that have not seen productivity gains, it is a smorgasbord of U.S. policy-influenced industries. Education was a drag on U.S. productivity. Healthcare, even the public sector itself. We stopped measuring government productivity in the 80s. So,
Because it wasn't going up, so why bother?
because why bother? So on the audacious goal of personalized tutors, in a sense, the president was calling for productivity leapfrogs in education. While he didn't say specifically what technical path to get there, he certainly laid out a vision that we believe if we invest in the components, and I have a whole strategy on how we're going to do that, we'll make progress. So I wanted to hit that point first. But I also want to comment on if cloud is another one that is basically an infrastructure challenge. Let me describe for you a 90-day example of this. I was in a room at the Omni Showroom. I chair a bunch of stuff, so meetings and whatnot. But I make a challenge in our Federal Advisory Committee that we listen to real people, with all due respect to the lobbyists in the room. They're wonderful at representing their, we could sit in rooms and people tell their talking points and they read the talking points, and you sit in a room and you thank them for their talking points and then you move on. And it's kind of an unproductive discussion. The goal was to hear from sort of real people. So on healthcare, we asked doctors to come in. So a primary care doctor who was not like an expert in policy, but didn't get the message on what the official policy points had to be, basically in a dialogue said something in this spirit, Mark. He said, I'd love to use the internet for healthcare, but my patient was moving from my family practice in Virginia to a family practice in Arizona, and asked me, the doctor, if the patient's records could be electronically transmitted to the doctor in Arizona, okay? And he basically said, by coincidence, the software package that this doctor had happened to be the same as the software package of the doctor in Arizona. He goes, great. No button that said email or send a colleague. So they did this convoluted thing where the tech department extracted the file, attached it to the internet on Microsoft Outlook there, Dan Reed, and sent it over the internet to the doctor in Arizona, imported the file, and technically speaking, it worked. The record transmitted. But the doctor's testifying this, and you got a bunch of policy folks in the room. The health lawyers in the room had a heart attack that this is a violation of every known to mankind HIPAA, healthcare privacy. So, Mark, the doctor says, I'm glad you're putting $20+ billion into healthcare IT, akin to what we're doing on cloud. But when will I have safe, secure email? So while we have this vision of modernizing health, and the president has backed up the vision with resources, the doctor said something so obvious. So we asked the private sector in the government's role as convener, within 90 days, we want consensus technical specs on safe, secure email. And you would have thought we were asking for religious warfare. I believe in a SOAP-based model. I wanted a RESTful approach. But they agreed to secure SMTP. And all the vendors, small, large, and everybody in between, it was an open website, directproject.org, everybody could participate. And the specs were published in a consensus model in 90 days, a shared reference implementation, 25,000 lines of code, published in 90 days thereafter. A startup, or I wouldn't say startup, they've been a modestly sized company in Minnesota that has no lobbyists, no Washington presence, found out about this through just the internet, and said, we want to be the first to commercialize. And within 90 days after the specs were written and the reference implementation, our first commercial transaction supported by the regs, the specs, was a hospital in Minnesota sent patient immunization data to the health department in Minnesota. Now, this random startup was the first to market, not the big incumbent folks who were in the room. And it moved the ball on security, because now we said, okay, we've at least got this basic encryption point to point. You authenticate here and there. The message is secure. You can use the system. It saves the hospital 95% of the cost to share data. To give you the math, it used to be tens of thousands of dollars to write point-to-point interfaces to connect the hospital to the health department. Every hospital has to do this. By adopting the standard, a one-time setup fee of $495, and they were up and running in 5 hours, okay? 50 organizations said last week they're gonna support the protocol. The going price, unlimited safe, secure email for doctors, 100% born out of the private sector, $15 a month unlimited. How's that, my brother? Government as convener. Audacious goals, yes. Results in 90 days. In the same spirit of productivity, when we in Austin spoke about Startup America, there's really two components to Startup America. One is basically, more generically speaking, make the ecosystem work, mentorship, access to capital, and so forth. But if you look at the lagging industries bill, health, energy, education, we've launched an initiative called DC to VC, which basically asks the question, how do we set the market conditions that would actually change the rules of the road? It just might happen to be that the early birds, entrepreneurial folks, will come in and be the first to take advantage, like this Vision Share company did on the Direct project. But it starts with, what is the rule of the road? I'll share one example in this, to your point about productivity. We believe today's the best time in America to be a healthcare innovator. Now, why? We believe the combination of the transparency provisions in the health reform law, combined with the incentive changes in the health reform law, combined with some broader administration activities, will translate to game changers. Now, what on earth am I talking about? Productivity, you get what you pay for. In healthcare, we pay for volume of service. Doctors and hospitals get paid more for volume. If you incentivize volume, all the software innovation in healthcare is about scheduling efficiency and billing optimization. I made a ridiculous amount of money in the advisory board optimizing in these areas for hospitals because they were willing to pay for things that advance those things. Imagine harnessing tech and innovation to actually keep people healthy. Well, Medicare, under the Affordable Care Act, has the authority to change the payment systems in healthcare from volume to value. You wouldn't know this about death panels, but you would know that this is the most fundamental change. Rob Atkinson, if the actuary, who is notoriously independent at HHS, certifies that a change in payment approach drives value in healthcare, and the actuary says it works, then you have the ability, under law, Secretary Sebelius has the authority to scale that payment model around the country. Now, what did John Doerr say about this at the JP Morgan Investor Conference? He sat in a room of 1,000 people. First time JP Morgan Investor Conference in healthcare ever had a session on healthcare IT-enabled services. John basically said, I see several billion-dollar companies born at the following intersection. If you now change how doctors are paid and there's an economic incentive for them to keep you healthy, there will be new IT-enabled services to say, what specialist should you refer that patient to that will deliver the most value for the dollar spent? Ask doctors today how much data they have when they make a referral choice. Seriously, it's basically word of mouth. But now I'll have data on cost and quality that I've never had before. And new companies are going to be born converting that raw data into meaningful insight when the doctor makes the decision. At the same time, we're unleashing all this new information. It turns out that the taxpayer spent tens of billions of dollars collecting data in healthcare, and it's sitting in the vault over at the CDC and whatever, and we're opening up healthdata.gov. So today, firms in 90 days are building valuable applications even before the payment systems have changed, testing out the hypothesis born on health data. And by June 9th, you're going to see a Lollapalooza that Secretary Sebelius is hosting of all these innovative apps. No government procurement, no fancy, buying things, just people who are taking the information and providing more value-focused IT-enabled services. And I am confident that will boost the productivity rate in that key sector, which is why I'm so pleased you made that a key dilemma. We need productivity growth in health, energy, and education. A word on taxes. Now, this is an example. I sat in the room with the president for the 5 hours with the CEOs of all these major corporations that came into the White House. And believe me, they were all over this repatriation issue. And it is most certainly an attractive concept. The president has been extremely focused on whether this policy lever can move. We have a couple of technical challenges. Today, people repatriate about $50 billion. I'm going to have my economist correct me. Roughly $50 billion a year come in through the current model where people do bring in money back. And so there is a revenue generator to Congress. So the CBO will score any repatriation tax holiday as a cost to the government. So we're going to have to make up for that cost somewhere. So what the president said is, and he looked at Geithner, and he said, Geithner, you convene the CFOs, and let's roll up our sleeves and figure out what is the comprehensive tax reform package that allows us to get this right in the global economy but does so in a revenue-neutral way. So we're committed to it. We got a bunch of people thinking about it, talking about it, and the president is data-driven on these issues. This is not an ideological issue. This is a data-driven issue, so let's work it out in that regard. We're committed to it. By the way, on global markets, we see this as a very important opportunity for the American economy. Literally tomorrow night, Thursday night, I don't know what day today is, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it is. Tomorrow night, all these medical device companies are coming to Washington with universities and I'll talk about this in a minute, regional innovation clusters, to have a conversation about, they're calling it the Safe Haven Summit, which is what are the breakthrough opportunities for innovative medical devices that can be born out of thinking about global opportunities, global markets, and see this as a net export opportunity. And we're so bullish on this. In the comment one earlier, Dan made it, Mark made it, on regional innovation clusters, the Economic Development Administration has committed to a process of promoting and supporting regional innovation clusters. It was an Akron, Ohio-based group that pulled universities together and stakeholders saying, we used to make tires and whatnot, we want to make medical devices. They became the locus. They applied, they won a grant, $1 million grant to spur innovation. It was that grant that catalyzed Stanford, Harvard, Hopkins, Medtronic, and all these companies to say, we want to help you, Akron, Ohio. And that's who's convening at this session tomorrow. It was in Akron, Ohio, under the leadership of Dr. Frank Douglas, who is a total rock star in the spirit of things. I'm filibustering. You're going to probably kill me if I'm going over.
I'm just looking at my thing.
But now I'm going to get a couple more if I want.
Yeah.
There are obviously, this educational issue is mission critical. And the NC WIT team made a comment. I want to say the following about this. In the 90-day spirit of what's tangible, what's real, as opposed to kind of the words, go women, go minorities, go make it happen. Let me say this. First of all, personal experience in Virginia. James Madison University ran an experiment. They have the traditional degrees in engineering, and then they created an entirely new school about 8 years ago. And that entirely new school says, what if we taught STEM education in a case method as opposed to the traditional model of study, the coursework, the theory, and literally they have classes like looking at a car and understanding the mechanics of how the carburetor and all those sort of components work, and then having the students understand the STEM components.
They don't have carburetors anymore.
They don't have fuel injectors. Thank you for that. I'm a real expert on these issues.
I was going to say that, right?
Thank you. They're using the old models to teach the students. They have found that women and minorities excel in these new models. Same subject matter, the tests are the same. At the end of the day, you got to prove that you know your stuff, but you teach it in a different way. We are all in, poker chips on the table, to identifying new pathways of learning. The message the president made yesterday around the ARPA for education was about experimentation and basically test, validate, and scale what works on ideas that will achieve the outcomes objectives, because the notion that the traditional model of 30 kids in a classroom or whatever the ratio is today is gonna be successful, we've got to be more creative. Now, money where the mouth is. Right now, actually, this is a convoluted part of how Congress worked. They attached the higher ed bill to the healthcare reform bill. So we have $500 million of grant opportunities to community colleges to experiment with fundamentally new models of learning. Right now, the grants you can apply for right now, Dan Reed, to say, how might we think about the hybrid models, pure digital models, whatever you want to call them, $500 million through our community college infrastructure, which is all about everyday Americans who want to refresh their skills and the like. I would challenge the audience to think about what are the innovative new models that can be prototyped, tested, and validated, and therefore showing the demonstrable results so that those ideas can scale. So the money is already in place. The grant applications are up. The Labor Department has it. They call them the TAA grants. I would encourage anybody who has a dream on how we can change the way we learn, powered by technology, data, or innovation, to consider applying for that program. One final observation, if I may, on the research and development 10-year cycle. Yes, Dan Reed, there is a long cycle, but In IT specifically, we see opportunities to collapse that time period. I'll share one final observation. NSF has a program where you can basically unsolicited, you're a rock star, and you say, I have a great idea, I'd like to just experiment. A professor named Rich Wolski at UC Santa Barbara had an idea looking at the Amazon Web Services cloud, saying, I would love to experiment with hybrid models or private models of cloud computing that achieve efficiencies but give us some security or reliability, or not to say that Amazon doesn't, but that they wanted to have more control, if you will. And he was part of a research consortium that included Rice University and 6 other institutions, and said, let's deploy this infrastructure. It was the fall of 2007, Dan Reed. He submitted this proposal to the NSF.
Yeah,
He was awarded.
I actually encouraged him to do that.
You did?
I did.
He's probably a friend of yours.
He is.
Wolski, in 2 years, was so successful, he commercialized his research, he open sourced the software, and he built a software services company called Eucalyptus Systems, and he was able to turn that idea into a prototype, and his first customer was NASA, who used their research base at Ames Research Center and created the Nebula program. My colleague, the chief information officer, was so impressed that within 6 months of it being working in NASA, he was able to turn that around and make that the default infrastructure to host the president's signature initiative, usaspending.gov. So, getting back to you, Mark, well, we have a vision for moving $20 billion of government IT to the cloud. It starts with leadership at the top. And to have the president's legislation when he was a senator on opening up information about spending be the prototype application that can move to the cloud, and to do so on research that was an idea in a professor's head in 2007, is our attempt to put all of this together. Long-term vision, making progress along the way, showing leadership, convening power of government. I've gone on too long.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Aneesh.
I gotta step out. I told Rob that I have to peace out back at the White House. I have a quick thing I got to do. But
Aneesh, you have to actually go back and be at the White House
Yes,
right now.
sir.
So
We can talk about you.
you'll talk about it, and Phil can answer questions as he.
we'll talk. Aneesh, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you
And sorry for my
participating.
filibustering. I got too excited about it.
Good to see you.
So, a couple of things. One, I know there are other folks from the administration. One thing I would suggest on the repatriation scoring, we did an event on this issue about a year ago, when Rob Shapiro, former Undersecretary of Commerce under the Clinton administration, has done a study on that. And I hope I'm not misleading or mischaracterizing Rob's research, but I believe what Rob has found is that the OMB scoring of that issue is actually wrong, and that there is or flawed, and that actually the scoring on this is actually at least not as negative and perhaps even positive. So I think that's an important issue to get right. The other thing, by the way, I was surprised that maybe Phil was going to bring this up, but neither Austin nor Phil have brought up. The report actually, the strategy actually does recommend an increase in the R&D tax credit, which is long overdue. We've done a lot of work on that. We've fallen way behind other countries on R&D tax generosity. We're now 17th in the OECD. The administration does propose going up from 14% to 17%, so there is a useful part there. So now that Aneesh is gone, we can say what we really want. But more seriously, I wanted to ask you, what for each of you, Mark, Bill, and Dan, what do you think is kind of, if you had to, in the federal government's a big place, there's a lot of bodies that can be thrown at this, but obviously there's limited resources. You have to pick and choose kind of what are the top things. What are the top 1 or 2 things each of you think, if you were telling the administration, look, in the next year, get this one right, that's the most important kinds of things? Mark?
I'll go first, just get down the aisle. I think the right way to think about those things are what are the goals? How do you prioritize the goals? What are the policies that will support those? And then how do you measure the results, just as a way to think about things? So I applaud the administration on the goals aspect of, they are setting audacious goals. They are doing things, although I still have to fill out every time I go to the doctor the same form. We'll figure that out later. But things like that, So if you set the goals, and then you have to prioritize them. So you can't do everything. So one piece of advice would be to say, you can't do everything. Everything's important, but you can't get everything done. And then the next thing after that would be, what are the policies in support of that? So, obviously the economy, without the economy humming, Everything else is really, really, really hard. You know, it just works out that way because it's about the money, right? So the idea of the tax repatriation, trying to keep it revenue neutral, yeah, I get that. But you know, the end result may be better if you didn't worry about that point. And by the way, if everybody just agreed to pay a 5% tax, it is revenue, and I'll do that. We'll be the first ones, right? You know, we would be revenue neutral. So you know, sort of the how do you implement the things are important. But I would say it's the economy, obviously, job creation, job stimulation, and then also on the education. We're not going to fix education in 2 years' time, but I think we're finally having discussions around the important things are about merit and you know, measurable results. So I would just get those two things right or on track if I could.
Good. Bill?
I would say a few things. I'd say first, get the federal budget right with a greater emphasis and focus on productivity, in particular government productivity, because I think there's a tremendous opportunity to reduce government cost if the focus wasn't on purely cost reduction, but rather on productivity growth at the government level, inclusive of, I think, a broad discussion that needs to be had on entitlement reform. Secondly, education. We've spoken a lot about education here today. I won't expand upon the comments that were made, but clearly it's critical for our country. And thirdly, tax reform, and a couple of comments on tax reform with this issue of revenue neutrality. Just to put this in perspective for you, there is between $1 trillion and $2 trillion of cash stuck in foreign countries. Here we are talking about a $50 billion revenue neutrality issue. No one's talking about bringing back between $1 trillion and $2 trillion and what the return on invested capital in the U.S. is on $1 trillion to $2 trillion, which, by the way, is far greater than that of $50 billion. And candidly, the number of jobs it would create by bringing that money back into the U.S. here, as well as the productivity growth inherent in that job creation combined with the ability to invest in innovation. That $1 trillion to $2 trillion can be put to work in investing in new innovation in the U.S. So I think we're stuck between the forest and the trees on this $50 billion revenue neutrality issue, if you will. So that's another point. And public-private partnerships would be the others. I mean, we're a great example, NCR, of what's possible with public-private partnership. With the state of Georgia, we moved our headquarters a few years ago to the state of Georgia, and we partnered closely with the state of Georgia, and we worked very tightly with them on building a new factory in the U.S. Now, picture this. It's 2009. Every major manufacturer in the U.S. is moving manufacturing plants out of the U.S. or closing manufacturing plants, in particular automotive companies. It's also a time when the economy was struggling mightily. We decided we're going to invest in building a manufacturing plant in the United States, in Georgia. We partner closely with the state of Georgia, generate nearly 1,000 jobs in the state of Georgia, and build a clean energy, efficient plant in the state of Georgia. By the way, that's just about to get LEED certified and be the only manufacturing plant in the United States that's LEED certified in terms of clean energy and green, and employ 900 people, all because of this public-private partnership with the state of Georgia, a willing partner in helping to help a company rebuild in the United States. So I think that's a very important part of the puzzle. So those would be the 4 pieces.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Dan?
So I think there's creative tension here, and you certainly heard it as we talked about, between short-term and long-term. I mean, we all feel the economic distress that the country is in, and there's enormous political pressure to find short-term solutions. In point of fact, all of these problems are long-term systemic issues, whether it be healthcare or education or immigration reform. We can go on down the list. They're complicated and there are many constituencies, and finding solutions require lots of parties to come to the table. I do think, in the spirit of what's often said about actors, you know, they became an overnight success after 20 years. One of the things that's important to remember in the innovation space is the concept of pipelining. Namely, that if you make long-term investments, things fall out of the other end of the pipeline on a short-term basis all of the time. but you have to keep feeding that pipeline. And so the way you get short-term successes is long-term investments in addressing the systemic issues. Having said that sort of as backdrop, there are a couple issues I would point out. One certainly is the R&D tax credit, and I was glad that Rob mentioned that. We've had annual renewals of this for Lord knows how many years now. We should own up to the truth and say that the R&D tax credit ought to be permanent, and that has a profound effect on the ability of companies to invest and innovate. I think there are some real issues about IP protection for all of us who are in the intellectual property business, and I would argue that essentially anybody who cares about innovation is in that business, not only domestically, but how we think about it internationally, because that affects our ability to move information around the world to support our international businesses as well as the U.S. ones. Those are important issues. The education issue, I think, is profoundly important. Because there are the issues of productivity in education. It is historically a labor-intensive process. I can say, having spent most of my life in the university world, that for places that pride themselves on being hotbeds of intellectual ferment, organizationally they are among the most slow to change of almost anything, and that's true of our K-12 system as well. I once told a friend of mine, when I was on an international advisory committee for university that was founded in the Middle Ages, that had they awakened the long-dead administrators of that university from the 1300s, they would have no trouble understanding how it worked because it hadn't changed any in at least 600 years. We have versions of that in our education system where we need to rethink what the partnership is. How do we put the right skills in people's heads at 40, at 50, not just at 20, given the rate of change that I mentioned before? So education, IP protection, and R&D tax credits, these issues of long-term investment are really important in my judgment.
Well, great, thank you. If you're like me, you really can't get enough of this, and you want to do it every day. So we actually have an event tomorrow, which I would encourage you all to attend. It actually is going to build exactly on this conversation. It's called U.S. Competitiveness, a New Conversation with New Opportunities. It's tomorrow, 8 o'clock to 1 at Union Station. And another great set of folks there, including Qualcomm CEO Paul Jacobs is going to be giving a keynote address, and Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is subcommittee chair for competitiveness in manufacturing, going to be giving the keynote lunch address. So I want to thank, in absentia, Aneesh Chopra, and also Mark Mcloughlin, Bill Nudi, and Dan Reed for really, I know how valuable your time is for all three of you and Anish's, and it's really great that you could take the time out and join us with that. And thank you so much for your comments. So,